In today's video, I wanted to continue with and finish my journey through the Bloodmoon expansion featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Last time, I completed the Skull Test of Loyalty and successfully performed the 6 rituals with the stones. Next, Thurston Heartfang had me investigate a crime within the Skull Village and come to a conclusion on what really happened. After that, I looked into a strange occurrence out on Lake Fjelding. It was there I met and teamed up with the Draugr Lord, Aislip. Upon returning to the Skull Village, werewolves attacked the Nords and Heartfang went missing. Amidst the chaos, I contracted Sanus lupinus, werewolf's disease, and was faced with the decision to cure it or live in exile from the Skull. Wanting to see both sides of the story, I first chose to cure the affliction. From there, Korst Windeye sent me on a mission to retrieve the totem of Claw and Fang. Facing down werewolves and fighting my way through their ranks, the next move was to perform the Restog, an ancient Skull tradition intended to appease the Allmaker. Upon its completion, I returned to the village and presented the Spirit Bear's heart to Windeye. This is where the story continues. Following up on my last conversation with Windeye, I returned to the Shaman.
The Restog is complete. Praise be to the All-Maker.
Asking him about the ominous signs reported on Solstheim, he recaps the last few strange occurrences, the fire on the lake and the werewolves. He then brings up a new one. Apparently, many Horkers have been slaughtered in the northern region of the island. There's no explanation for it, and Korst yet again points to the Bloodmoon prophecy. Trying my luck this time, the Shaman still refuses to speak on it. Inquiring further on the Horkers, he wants me to see if mortals were the ones behind it, and asks me to travel to Castle Karstaag. It's apparently a castle made of entirely ice, and it's ruled over by the frost giant Karstaag. Karstaag has been peaceful towards the Skull for some time, so Windeye suspects that it could be the doing of his minions, the Reeklings. Unfortunately, I won't be allowed through the front entrance, but there's apparently a hidden entrance in the sea to the north. This is a really cool mission to me. To be honest, the one thing I feel like Solstheim lacks is more settlements. Obviously, I know that the island is like that due to lore reasons, and it's doing an amazing job at making you feel like you're alone in the wilderness, but the few touches here and there of civilization are a breath of fresh air. Hugging the northern shoreline, I ran past some Horkers, keeping my distance so as to not aggro them, and that's when the realization came. These things are all dead. There were so many corpses laying around. There were probably more dead Horkers on this small stretch of land than I've seen on the entire island. Before long, I saw icy spires peek over the horizon, and getting a closer look, it wasn't the traditional castle per se, but if anything, it looked way cooler. Just for curiosity's sake, I approached the front of the structure and walked to the main door. As expected, there was no option to go inside, so following Korst's advice, I backtracked to the shoreline and began swimming around. After a bit of back and forth, I finally spotted a cave, verified its nameplate, and went on through. Readying myself for anything, I finished my swim and emerged from the icy waters. Wandering through the tunnels up ahead was a lone Reekling. Pulling out Hope's Fire and charging in, I was all of a sudden stopped and thrown into a conversation. The Reekling was actually speaking to me. This happened before with a scamp, but I had no idea that these little blue beings were capable of communicating like this. Its name was Krish, and it opened by calling my character ugly and too tall. It asked what business I have in Castle Karstaag. Bringing up the death of the Horkers, Krish got lost in the thought of rotten meat and then snapped out of it. The Reekling said that it might be able to help me, but it's got its own problems to worry about. Inquiring about said issues, Krish tells me that Karstaag has actually left the castle. No one knows why and no one knows where he went. In his absence, some of the Reeklings decided to take over the fortress, and Krish specifically calls out one by the name of Dolk. At some point, the Reeklings had a falling out, and Krish's group separated from Dolk's group. Dolk is running the show upstairs, while Krish is the last of his crew down here. Krish made a deal with some of the local Grawl, asking them to fight by their side, but the Grawl turned on them. Apparently, no one's allowed to enter the castle without Karstaag's blessing. Krish is the only one alive with said permissions, but the Grawl need to be dealt with first. It asks for my help in handling the situation, and with very little choice, I teamed up with the tiny blue guy. I found this part so neat, and it's something Bloodmoon has been delivering a lot of. First, I get to partner with a Draugr Lord, and now a Reekling. I can only imagine what creature might be next. As explicitly mentioned by Krish, the only enemies present in here are Grawl. They're around the same difficulty as the Lightkeeper was way back when. They're really slow, so that's something I was able to use to my advantage. However, if I get caught up in their attacks, or even if Krish tanked too much, I knew it would be cause for concern. In fact, at one point, I got too greedy and made Krish the punching bag. The Reekling ended up succumbing to its wounds, and that was technically a failure for this quest, so I had to revert to a previous save and try again. The ice caves are relatively straightforward, and a Grawl can be found at almost every stretch of the way. There are approximately 8 of them in total, and once the final one was defeated, Krish spoke to me again. It gave me permission to move up into the castle and speak with Dulk. Interestingly, if you prematurely find yourself at the doorway to the next zone, the game will say that you cannot go forward without Karstaag's blessing. Entering the banquet hall, Krish and I wandered up a small ramp and into a big room. Here, there were at least half a dozen hostile Reeklings, and all of them charged in for the attack. Compared to the Gralls, the fight was a breeze, and Krish still battled by my side. It makes sense why though, as these were surely Dulk's companions. At the other end of the banquet hall was a door that led to the throne room. Going on through and ascending one more ramp, I saw yet another lone Reekling wandering the corridors. Preparing myself for the attack, it was also non-hostile, and upon further inspection, this was Krish's nemesis, Dulk. Chatting with it, it opened by asking what I was doing here, and scowled at me for bringing Krish back up. When asked about the death of the Horkers, Dulk said that the Reeklings weren't behind it. However, Dulk mentioned something interesting. Karstaag was apparently taken by the werewolves. The same thing that happened to Tharstan, and the same thing that happened to Carius. Chatting with Krish one last time, they were rather cold and dismissive towards me, telling me to leave after my business was concluded. Looting what treasures I could find around the castle, I left the fortress and recalled back to Skull Village. Informing Windeye of the new information, he calls it a very bad sign, and fears that we haven't seen the worst of it. As a reward for my efforts, he gives me the Stalrim Longsword of Flame, citing that it'll be useful for further battles against the Grawl. What's more, when I'm ready, Windeye is finally going to tell me about the Bloodmoon prophecy. The Longsword of Flame is a one-handed longblade with really decent stats. The only thing is that it's incredibly heavy, sitting at a weight value of 70. It does have the enchantments of fire damage for 5 to 10 points for 5 seconds, and weakness to fire for 50% for 5 seconds though, so that could definitely be a tool for almost any situation. With that, thus ends the quest, the Castle Karstaag. Right now is a pretty pivotal part for the Bloodmoon storyline. What happens next is where the previous branching pathways meet back up. So it's time to revert the save back all the way to just after the siege of the Skull Village. Before doing so though, I think we're all owed an explanation on what the Bloodmoon prophecy actually is. Speaking with Korst again, he finally opens up about the whole thing. According to legend, once per era, a demon god walks the land with his hounds, creatures that are incredibly strong and terrifying. He's known as the Hunter, and his coming is preceded by 3 signs. Windeye had hoped that the prophecy was wrong or that he misunderstood it, but it's clear now that neither of those are the case. Those 3 signs are of course the fire on Lake Fjelding, fire from the Eye of Glass, the massacre of the Horkers, the Tide of Woe, and lastly the Blood Moon itself, when the moon turns red with the blood of the hunter's prey. Now, all we can do is wait for the hunter's game. Unsure of what that is, I inquired about it and Korst explained away. Sometimes it's entire tribes, and sometimes it's just one person. The hunter snatches them and brings them to his hunting grounds. They're then forced to fight their way through hordes of werewolves, and those who manage to survive go up against the hunter himself. The hunt ends when the prey dies, or lives long enough until the blood moon goes down and dawn breaks. At this point, all the skull can do is sit and wait until the whole thing passes over and pray that they don't get taken by the hunter. This is now officially the point where the story gets reverted and I'm brought back in time. The werewolf attack has ended, but I contracted Sanus lupinus, the beginning stages of lycanthropy. The skull will only deal with me if I cure the affliction, so it seems like exile is my only option. Remembering what Korst said, in 3 days' time, the disease will fully take over. So with nothing to do but wait, I isolated myself on the hills of the Felsad coast, albeit not far from the village at all, and forced 3 days to go by. A quick cutscene shows a werewolf transforming at the sight of the full moon and a strange masked figure watching over it. As I'm brought back to the gameplay, I see that my character is now a werewolf. My movements are incredibly fast, almost impossible to keep up with, and my point of view is distorted. I now see the world through a wider angle, surely an advantage of the beast. There's also a blood red vignette surrounding the view, which I thought was a nice touch. I quickly realized that I can't access my inventory, nor can I cast any spells. On the same note, I can't loot anything or interact with containers or other NPCs' inventories. The only form of offense and defense that I have are my hands. These gnarly, mangled, beast-like hands have razor-sharp claws. Similar to fighting with melee weapons, I can charge up my attacks and unleash a powerful slash that deals a lot more damage. Fatigue doesn't seem to be a factor at all while in werewolf form, which is actually a blessing in of itself. Magic has been turned obsolete, and HP is rather interesting. A huge downside is that I'm no longer able to heal on command via spells or potions. However, it does seem that my health regenerates over time, albeit very slowly. Another interesting effect, which I've only seen work on Reavers, is that sometimes humans run away in fear. An otherwise lengthy battle turns into a manhunt, and that was something I thought was really neat. I've already discussed movement speed, but accompanying that is my new leaping ability. The hops are pretty crazy, and allow me to cover great distances very quickly. At this point, there was no clear goal or indication of what needed to be done, so I waited it out, and at around 6 AM, transformed back into my Breton form. It makes sense that my character's naked, but this is something that would soon get old for me very quickly. With each transformation, I need to re-equip my gear all over again. This includes armor, accessories, and weapons. Falling under the armor category are the boots of blinding speed. For these, I need to cast a custom spell before putting them on in order to negate their negative effects. This whole ordeal isn't necessarily a deal breaker for wolf form, just something that's pretty tedious. Curious as to what happens next, as the show must go on, I forced another wait, and in the late evening to early night, around dusk, I transformed back into a wolf.
Your master has a task for you, my hound. In the tombs of Scalara lies the totem of claw and fang. There I wish it to remain. When the Skull come for it, hunt them down, kill them all, and protect the totem.
Something I've got to give credit to Bethesda for is this mysterious figure's voice acting. As in Oblivion, other than Sheogorath and a select few others, they really dropped the ball with the Daedric Prince voice acting.
Come to beg Sanguine to add a bit of spice to an otherwise drab existence.
With each transformation, the game will always display a message that you need to feed or else your strength gets sapped. Because of this, I always made it my mission to slay a human before embarking on any of the quests. It isn't exactly a spoiler, and I don't think there's ever really a grand reveal for it, but this figure that my character sees in their dreams is the aforementioned hunter, and that hunter is Hircine, Master of Beasts, Lord of the Hunt. He's the creator of werewolves, and from all of the information that was gathered while embarking on the other pathway for this questline, the pieces are slowly coming together. What's more, the next 3 quests that he has the player embark on are actually the same missions that were performed for the Skull, just from the perspective of the werewolves. So, entering the tombs of Scalara, I had to face down waves of Skull warriors, not too different from before when I needed to defeat Hircine's hounds. Of course, now when I'm not there to lend a hand, the Skull managed to scrounge up a small army and send them on the missions they had me do alone. The Skull warriors were certainly tough and not a force to be trifled with. Once one enemy was defeated, the next one would show up right after, leaving very little room for health regeneration. At one point, I survived a hefty battle and was left with a sliver of health. I knew from this point on that I had to lock in, or I was going to have a really difficult time. The strategy while in werewolf form is rather simple and actually quite effective. You have to use your movement speed to your advantage. lunge in for the attack, and quickly hop back out. Not too far off from what I normally do in my human form. This is easier said than done though, when you're not confined to a tight space like this cave. I didn't have enough health to tank the hits or to play around with other strategies, so for now, this one was going to have to do. At some point in the tomb, I discovered what's arguably one of the most useful features that comes with lycanthropy. As a werewolf, you actually have the ability to detect enemies on the local map. They come up as little red dots, and you can see them moving around in the halls and rooms. This is a feature that I should have used at all times for the rest of the questline, but unfortunately, it fell off my radar rather quickly, and I only used it again for the final quest. Once I found the chest with the totem of Claw and Fang, I tried to interact with it, but the game told me that those cursed by the beast may not open the sacred chest. From here on out, I was on guard duty and completely focused. Skull warriors would periodically happen across my hallway and come in for the attack. I made sure to lunge in, hit, and lunge back out, keeping my distance and making quick work of the tribesmen. Other than dying right away, the worst thing that could happen was getting overwhelmed by 2 or more enemies and then biting the dust. After several minutes of repeating the process and guarding the totem with my life, I soon received a journal update and a message saying that the tide of skull hunters has receded and that they've abandoned their quest. Transforming back into a human, I was a little confused for a bit on what to do next. The quest hadn't officially ended, but there wasn't anything else for me to do in the tombs of Scalara, nor was there anybody to report to. Finally, I had the sense to rest again and was visited by Hircine.
You have performed well, Hound. The totem is undisturbed for now, and your master is pleased. I grant you this boon to aid you in your hunt. Your claws are now as sharp as the edge of my spear. Let all who would stand before you feel their edge. We will speak again.
With stronger attacks and the Daedric Prince pleased, it looks like my werewolf form only gets more powerful from here on out. With that, thus ends the quest, Dream of Hircine. I understand that Hircine only visits my character in their dreams, but the transformations and timings for them are a little finicky. I found myself going back and forth between forms quite a lot, as he wasn't visiting me during my transformations back into a human. In any case, when ready, I went in for the next dream.
It is time to serve your master again. The totem was stolen while the hounds slept, and the skull prepared to hunt the spirit bear this night. Hunt the hunters and slay the beast.
My attacks are now noticeably stronger, and fighting outdoors with my preferred style is a breeze compared to the tight spaces of the tomb. Something interesting that I noticed while in werewolf form is that human enemies aggro onto me from really far away. More times than not, they'll see me way before I see them. Sometimes they'll be on a part of Solstheim that hasn't even been rendered in for me yet. At first, I was confused on why that was, but my best guess now is that it's actually to help the player. You need at least one human kill to fuel your werewolf rampage, and instead of looking all over the island, wasting your time, it's a lot easier when they come looking for you. As mentioned before, this is the reverse perspective of the Karstaag. Instead of going out with Rolf and Co., I'm actively hunting Rolf and Co., except of course, they're nowhere to be found in this version of events. Given the space I had in the great outdoors and the spacing of the enemies in general, this quest was so nice. All of the Skull Warriors came to me, and I was able to run circles around them, slashing and beating them down. Soon enough, I received a journal update that the skull had retreated, and all that was left for me to do now was kill the spirit bear. Finding the polar bear in the woods, I slew it rather quickly, fled to a safe corner of the Isenfir Plains, and went through my transformations.
Your master is well pleased. The skull find no fortune with their god. I grant you this boon for your service, Hound. When you walk in the day, you may now summon a companion to your side to aid you in your travels. Hunt well until I call upon you again.
Hircine gave me the ability to summon bone wolves, and exactly as I expected, similar to summoning bears and regular wolves, this spell was bugged. My ego was spared knowing that it wasn't a me issue, but I was also disheartened to see that I wouldn't be able to use these abilities at all. With that, thus ends the quest, Disrupt the Skull Hunt. With one last quest to go for this segment of the storyline, and knowing exactly what it's going to be, I waited until nightfall.
I have another task for you, Hound. There is a castle of ice to the north, under siege from within by renegade servants. I am in need of the master of this castle, and I do not want him distracted by this foolishness. Go there, kill the rebels, and end the siege.
One thing I'm really glad that I did for my Bloodmoon experience was explore both of the non-wolf and werewolf pathways. So far, I'm of the opinion that the gameplay is more fun as a werewolf, but the storytelling and lore is vaster through the skull. Obviously the cutscenes are a welcome sight and add a lot to the experience, but Hircine never really explains why I need to do things. The skull were pretty vague on a lot of the details too, but through context clues, it wasn't too difficult to piece things together. The werewolf gameplay is amazing, fun, and refreshing. The only thing though is that it does feel sort of like mindless violence. Your one goal is to stop the skull, whereas from the skull perspective, you're attempting to appease the Allmaker through ancient rituals and traditions, as well as investigating ominous signs around the island. Unrelated, but something else I haven't touched upon yet, is that you can actually change back and forth between forms while embarking on Hircine's quests. I figured for the added immersion and fresh gameplay, might as well stay as a lycanthrope, but otherwise, Magicka would have come in handy for some of these missions. Entering Castle Karstaag through the main gate, I came across my old friend Dulk in the throne room. Interestingly, the perspective even changes for which Reekling my character quote-unquote sides with. Apparently, Dulk's master said that I would come, and in order to please both of our masters, I need to descend to the caverns below and kill Krish as well as the Grawl. It's interesting because for this quest, the enemy is the same. The Grawl need to be eliminated. I'm just entering the castle through a different way, and therefore meeting with a different Reekling first. Down in the banquet hall section, the half a dozen Reeklings were still there and still aggressive towards me, so maybe they really aren't Dulk's men. I'm unsure though if that's because I was in werewolf form, or if it's just part of the quest. As for the Grawl down below, well, for whatever reason, they were incredibly easy opponents to defeat while in wolf form. My fast-paced fighting mechanics far outmatched their slow, heavy attacks. If they landed a hit, they would barely deal any damage, and my attacks tore straight through their HP. In no time, the 8 or so Grawl were defeated, and soon I landed on Krish. Interestingly, for this side of the story, there's seemingly no way to interact or even reason with it. It just aggroes onto you and comes in for the attack. This makes me wonder if there was a good side and a bad side. Does that mean Krish was the noble Reekling for not siding with the werewolves, and Dulk was the evil Reekling for entertaining them? After all, it seems like Karstaag warned Dulk that I'd be coming to help out with the predicted civil war. Realistically though, this quest was probably just meant to be a grand character study on Reeklings. A curtain reveal that they are intelligent and political creatures. Once everything down here was taken care of, I went back up to the main level and briefly spoke with Dulk. Nothing too important was shared and he just shooed me along out the door. So, forcing my transformations, I waited again for Hircine to come to me in my dreams.
You have ended the siege at Castle Karstaag, and your master is well pleased with your efforts. You have served me well, and I offer you this gift, the Hunter's Wind. May you never tire in your hunting, my hound. I will seek you out, should I need you again.
This reward was actually pretty useful, and nice to have in a bind. Hunter's Wind is a greater power, and restores up to 1000 health points each day. So if I was in my natural Breton form and in the fight of a lifetime, I'm looking at you, Gaynor and Almalexia, it would have been perfect. With that, thus ends the quest, Siege of Castle Karstaag. At this point, the story has officially caught up to where it was left off. The Bloodmoon prophecy is underway, and now all I can do is wait around for the hunt to begin. This is the climax of the whole DLC, the moment I've been waiting for. It's endgame territory, so it's best to go into this as prepared as possible. Through the skull, you receive the Stalrim Longsword of Flame, a worthy blade that can protect just about anyone who's proficient with long blades. Through Hircine, you have the gift, or curse, that turns your whole being into a killing machine. Before resting for the big event, I paid a quick visit to Fort Frostmoth in order to completely repair my gear. Once ready, I isolated myself from the civilized world and waited for 9 PM to strike.
Have been here for days now, and you are the last. It is time for my hunt, and you are to take part. I have chosen only the most worthy to take part in the hunt. Carius of the Imperials, Heartfang of the Skull, the Frost Giant Karstaag, and you. You have proven yourself a worthy hunter, and so you have been given this honor. You and the others are to find your way to my hunting grounds. Take great care, as only one of you will earn the glory of facing the hunter himself in battle while the Bloodmoon lights the sky. The others have gone ahead, so only you remain to begin. Beware, mortal. My hounds are about, and they hunger for blood. Perhaps I will see you soon. Now go.
So now we get the full picture of what happened to Carius, Tharstan, and Karstaag, taken as the prey for the hunter's game. I'm the last victim of the hunt, and it sounds like only one of us gets to take on the hunter in the end. What happens to the other three is probably easy to guess. Now, because I'm in werewolf form, going through the first doorway into the outer ring starts out pretty rough. Waiting on the other side is Captain Falk's Carius, and upon seeing me, he goes ballistic. He says that he can see straight through my werewolf form and knows it's me. He's sorry that it's come to this, but so long as I've joined the Dark Forces, he can't be allies with me. Killing Falks is actually pretty easy. He's weaker than the Skull Warriors, as his health drops rather quickly and his blade doesn't do a whole lot of damage. This isn't quite how I wanted the story to go though. I quite liked Falks, and him making it back to Fort Frostmoth would be the reunion we all deserve. So, reverting back and going through the doors in human form, this time Carius spoke to me civilly. The captain was glad that I was here, although he was sorry to see that I got caught up in Hircine's hunt. Carius has been in the outer ring for quite some time now, and he witnessed Tharstan and Karstaag get brought over as well. Falks knows that we have to fight our way through the maze and reach the inner ring. Due to his depleting strength, he asks if we can fight side by side. I'm prompted to either say yes, or to strike him down here and now, which is a pretty wicked option. Of course, I tell him to tag along, but it's unfortunately all in vain. You see, the werewolves in Hircine's hunt aren't your average lycanthropes. For whatever reason, these ones hit way harder and have a ton more health. In human form, I was no match for them. If I tanked the hits, I'd be dead within seconds. Letting Carius tank, he'd also perish really quickly. I tried over and over again, but unfortunately, I felt like I needed to be in wolf form. The movement speed and attacks were just much better than what I was able to come up with right now, and I had no way to heal the captain. There was no way to force the transformation, as waiting wasn't permitted, and there were simply too many werewolves in the area. Thinking on my toes, I didn't see any other options at the time besides reverting back, transforming, and sacrificing Carius. Looking back, maybe there were some things that I could have tried, but at the end of the day, if Falks dies, then Falks dies. So, slashing my way through Captain Carius, I advanced onwards through the outer ring and got a good system in place. Fighting more than one wolf at a time meant certain death. One at a time though was fine, and the classic lunge in, strike, lunge out fighting tactic was implemented. My attacks were certainly more powerful, but I still had to be extra cautious with my health. Periodically, I'd run into these wolf statues made of ice. Upon getting close to them, a jump scare would ensue, and it'd be an extra fighter to deal with. Remember during the very first quest as a werewolf, when I discovered the local map had a UAV system in place, and haven't used it since? Well, wouldn't you know it, the local map would soon become my best friend. I was able to see where the remaining wolves were, their patrol paths, and I was even able to see where the ice statues were located. That way I knew which nooks to avoid. This made my time here immensely easier, and pretty soon I found my way to the portal leading into the inner ring. Going through it in wolf form, I got a bit of a surprise. Tharstan was waiting for me on the other side, and upon seeing me he came charging in. Once he was close enough though, he too transformed into a werewolf. Heartfang and I briefly spoke. Similar to Carius, he saw right through my form. Tharstan appeared to be happy participating in the hunt and enjoyed his time here. He claims to have lived for a long time due to something called Hircine's ring. His goal is to be the one who faces down the hunter, and in order to do that, I must be eliminated. The fight was rather anticlimactic. I utilized his flinches and staggers against him and dropped the Skull Leader in a matter of seconds. With his dying animation came a message from the game. As Heartfang breathes his last breath, the Hircine's ring disappears from his finger and has found a new owner. Obviously, in werewolf form, the ring isn't something that I have access to right now, but it's definitely something I'll be going over later. For those who were curious, if I had showed up in human form, Tharstan would have tagged along with me for a bit as we fought our way through more of the werewolves. Eventually, we would have gotten to a little nook that holds an empty chest, and that's where the grand reveal would have occurred. Either way, Heartfang would have turned on me. It's interesting because the Skull, and moreover Tharstan, claimed to not know what happened to Carius. Since Tharstan was apparently very familiar with Hircine and the hunt, I'd be willing to bet that he knew Falx was taken to the hunting grounds. Furthermore, Korst Windai knew of the Bloodmoon prophecy and what happens during the hunt as well, but just refused to believe it. So if anything, the Skull really did lie right to my face. The inner ring is pretty much a carbon copy of the outer ring, and if I'm being honest, I wish they changed things up here. It's another slow crawl through a maze with werewolves at every turn. It's too much of the same for me, and there's a lot that Bethesda could have done to switch things up. Make it a different layout or different environment, add traps and puzzles, do wave-based combat instead of a dungeon crawl, have the player find a few different keys or objects in order to progress. To me, those little changes would have made this part of the dungeon more interesting. Eventually, I made it to the center of the ring and hopped through the portal to the Huntsman's Hall. Thankfully, this was a completely different look to the dungeon. It was a great big open area, and standing in its center was a creature I had never seen before. It was very Yeti-like, except it had 5 eyes and horns on its head. This was the final participant of the hunt, Karstaag. It's unfortunate that I never got to have any interactions with him before this moment. That would have made this fight a little more meaningful to me. The fact that I had this whole area to run and jump around in made the fight actually pretty easy. I was able to perform my attacks no problem and remain out of range from his slow, heavy hits. Something I was a little confused on was why were all 3 fighters in different areas? Did Tharstan and Karstaag fight their way through the outer ring and only Karstaag made it past the inner ring? Was Captain Carius unable to make it past the first zone? Or was each fighter placed in this specific area based off of their fighting abilities? In any case, before long, Karstaag was defeated and I was the only member of the prey left, meaning I'd be the one to fight the hunter.
So, you are the one. You have escaped my hounds and beaten back the other challengers. I had rather expected the giant to prevail, but no matter. You have proven yourself a worthy hunter, and you have earned the greatest honor that can be bestowed upon a mortal. You are to be my prey. I ask you though, what is it that makes a hunter great? Is it his strength, the speed with which he strikes? Or is it his guile, the ability to outwit his prey? Answer me, mortal, and decide your fate.
Quickly pausing, I did a little bit of research here into what the outcome of each choice would be. This was mainly so I wouldn't end up with a reward that I couldn't use, or in general a decision that I'd regret. So I picked the one that seemed the best for my needs.
So you have chosen, and so shall be your fate. To face me in all my glory would be less than sporting. So you shall face but one of my aspects, the one you have chosen. We have little time. The blood moon sinks low in the sky. Prepare yourself, mortal, for now you are the hunted.
Each pick has a different aspect of Hircine that the player would get to fight. For Guile, it appears to be a regular, human-sized version of the Daedric Prince. He attacks with his trusty spear and moves relatively quick. If you rely on ranged attacks, good luck, because Hircine is very elusive and hard to pin down. For the first couple of tries, I attempted the battle in wolf form. He honestly wasn't that difficult. The problem area though came from the AoE of his paralysis attack. Getting caught in his stun took forever to wear off, and the free hits meant certain death. So I then tried it in human form and unfortunately had worse luck. My spells wouldn't land due to his jumpy nature, and even if they did, his reflect ability just inflicted the damage right back at me. I couldn't move the same way I did as a werewolf, nor did my attacks do nearly as much damage. So, switching back to wolf form, I tried the process over and over again. Due to my saves getting overwritten, I couldn't try out the other fights like I originally wanted to. However, if you selected strength, Hircine would have transformed into a bear that attacks slow but hits hard. According to the USP, it's the easiest aspect to deal with. The reward for it is an amulet that boosts strength for 10 points and fortifies attack by 15 points. If you selected speed, he would have transformed into a wolf that moves quickly and has really high luck, so it gets in good attacks and is tricky to land a hit on. The reward for this one is another amulet, except this one boosts speed for 10 points and fortifies acrobatics and athletics for 15 points. Again, this fight wasn't necessarily hard, especially in werewolf form, and that's what made it fun for me. It didn't take long to drop his health down. I wasn't investing minutes into each fight just for him to wipe me with a sliver of health left. I could get him down to about half health in around 20 seconds or so. I only took L's when I didn't respect my opponent, I lost focus on the fight, I wasn't locked in, or if I failed to avoid his attacks. Finally, for my fight with the Guile aspect, I caught a lucky break and avoided most of his paralysis attempts. Methodically slashing and clawing at Hircine, I soon bested the huntsman and beat the hunter's game. Returning to human form and looting the aspect, I was able to walk away with Hircine's weapon, the Spear of the Hunter. Its thrust stats are 40 to 60 points of damage, and it has the enchantments of Paralyze for 10 seconds, Burden for 50 points for 10 seconds, and Poison for 4 points for 5 seconds. For those who don't know, Spear was the first major melee skill that I trained and honed. It's gonna be nice to get to return to my roots. Finished with the Morrowind Glacier and this twisted game, I left the Huntsman Hall via the portal.
This cannot be. The Bloodmoon falls, and the prey still lives. You have defeated my aspect, but I will return, mortal. The Bloodmoon will rise again, and my hounds will walk the lands. Let this world enjoy its brief respite, for Hircine will hunt again.
As the cutscene ends, I'm back out on Solstheim and surrounded by the broken glacier. There's nothing left of the Huntsman's game, including the bodies of all the fallen NPCs. Technically, that concludes Bloodmoon's main questline. Hircine will return in the 4th era, which comes sooner than later, but the island is free from his demonic grip. Both Fort Frostmoth and the Skull won't be harmed by the werewolves anymore. However, since my canon playthrough is with the werewolf pathway, the Skull still don't want anything to do with me. Luckily, that's something that I can change. With that, thus ends the quest, Hircine's Hunt. The final quest for this series isn't necessarily part of the main questline, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it is needed in order to tie up some loose ends. If the player wishes to cure their lycanthropy, this is the way to do it. At this point, turning into a werewolf every night, being shunned by society, not being able to loot or access my inventory, and having to re-equip all of my gear with every transformation is certainly more of a curse than it is a blessing, and it's no longer worth it to me. So I'm more than happy to be rid of it. I will miss the insane movement speed and the powerful attacks though. Those were really handy to have, but not enough to justify the affliction. The quest begins with the player on Solstheim's docks, finding a note on the ground near Basks in the Sun. Picking it up, it reads, "Olga, did you hear about the raven at the altar of Thrond? It's enormous. They're saying it's a sign that the witches have come to Solstheim. Signed, Helena." This brings up a journal entry, and technically it's supposed to mark the altar of Thrond on your map as well, although it didn't do that for me. The altar of Thrond is close to the center of the island and approximately west of Lake Fjalding. Finding the raven and approaching it, it began to speak with me.
We can end your curse! The wolf may walk no more!
The raven is actually a witch of Glenmoral, a reoccurring faction in the series that helped cure the player's vampirism in Oblivion. This witch, Etienne, offers me a chance to cure my lycanthropy for good, or at least that's what she thinks, but that's something we'll get into later. You have the option of accepting or declining the offer, and of course I said yes. What happens next is that she teleports you to her coven's den. However, because I'm currently in werewolf form, her sisters don't take kindly to my presence and actually aggro onto me. Etienne quickly says her piece of dialogue about how I'll need to sacrifice innocence and flesh, as well as gather some items for her sisters. Backing out of the conversation, all 3 witches now begin attacking me, and I'm forced to kill them. This, however, is probably the best outcome. Once all 3 were slain, I transformed back into a human and looted their corpses. On Isabel's body, I found a note from another witch. The note talked about how lengthy, challenging, and drawn out the werewolf cure process was. So, in case of emergencies, a witch named Agnes had a scroll created that would instantly rid the condition for anyone who used it. The scroll is apparently hidden in a hollowed out icicle on the ceiling. Casting levitation and reaching the container, the scroll of the Wolfender was indeed there, and reading it would have easily put an end to my curse. Now, reverting back my save, temporarily transforming into a human, and repeating the process, this time the witches were a lot more cordial with me. Felice, one of Etienne's sisters, needed me to harvest the petals from a wolfsbane flower. Only one of them grows on Solstheim, and that's at Hvitcalled Peak on the northern part of the island. As for Isabel, she needed me to collect 1 bunch of ripened belladonna berries. These can either be found on Spriggans or growing outside of tombs on the island. This portion of the quest was actually incredibly easy. Leaving Gloomy Cave, I traveled south to find some Spriggans. Locating one and not finding any berries in its inventory, I noticed that I was actually right beside a barrow. At the dungeon's doorstep were 2 ripened belladonna plants. Harvesting them, I got the berries and then moved on to the northern part of the island. Traveling in wolf form, I got there in no time, and Hvitcalled Peak had 0 defenses. There weren't any enemies around, and I was able to take the wolfsbane petals without any problems. Returning to Gloomy Cave in no time and presenting the sisters with the ingredients, I then spoke again with Etienne. She told me to meet her back at the altar of Thrond for the final process of the cure. Doing so, Etienne had a weak, helpless, innocent woman lying on the altar. The Witch of Glenmoral told me that I would need to kill the Nord and bring her heart over. Obeying her command, the witch took the organ, chanted some words, and doused it with the potion I helped create. This transformed it into the heart of the wolf, and my next set of instructions were to place it back into the Nord's chest. This ended up reviving the woman, but turning her into a werewolf via my curse. In order to end my affliction for good, I would need to slay the beast, which was essentially like killing my version of lycanthropy. One prod with the spear of the hunter, and the wolf was slain. Talking with Etienne one last time, she said that I would never again turn into a werewolf, nor could I contract the disease. Waiting one full day, she was correct, and I didn't transform at nightfall. Recalling to Skull Village and having a chat with Korst Windeye, he talked about how peace was restored in the land, and that Tharstan is gone but never forgotten. However, going deeper into the topic, he admits to hearing the rumors about Heartfang being tempted by dark magic, and only hopes that the next leader stays true to their spirit. As for who that leader is, it can't be me, nor does Korst want the title, so all they can do is wait and see. Next, we kind of go through the exact same conversation that we had when I first cured myself of the affliction. He names me Bloodskull and gives me Rigmore Halfhand's old home. Unfortunately, no Stalrim longsword of flame, so that is a blade I miss out on. With that loose end tied up, the last thing I wanted to check out was Fort Frostmoth. I wanted to see if they had gotten any closure on Captain Carius. Chatting with both Artoria and Lucius, they officially stopped asking me to find Falks and assumed that he was just killed in action, which at this point is the right mindset to have. He's the one part of the plot that I wished I did differently, but if anything, had I tried to go through it in human form, I probably still would have been in the outer ring of the Hunter's game. For curiosity's sake, I spawned a clone of Carius into Frostmoth using console commands. The reunion with him was nice, as he said he was teleported out of the Mortrag Glacier as it began to fall apart. He's happy to see that I survived the whole thing as well. Beyond that though, he doesn't really have anything interesting or unique to say, and the soldiers still register him as being dead, so nothing really changes. Before moving into my overall thoughts, there's one last thing I wanted to touch on. Remember back in the inner ring of the hunt, when Tharstan was killed and I received the ring of Hircine? And remember when the Witch of Glenmoral said I'd never be able to transform into a werewolf ever again? Well, because of that ring, her statement is technically untrue. By slipping on the piece of jewelry and selecting yes, even after receiving the cure, I'm transformed into a werewolf for around 6 hours. I have all of the same stats that I once had, and what's more, I no longer have to worry about bloodlust, so I don't have to kill any humans, elves, or beast folk to remain at full strength. Hircine's ring essentially acts as a way to turn into a werewolf on command, which is all I could have ever asked for. I no longer have to worry about transforming in front of people or being inconvenienced every night at 9 PM. I can still use those elite fighting abilities and book it around Vardenfell at lightning speed, no problem. I'll be getting into it in just a bit, but if I had to redo Bloodmoon all over again, I'd stick to the Skull storyline, tough it out through the outer ring, kill Tharstan right away, and use the ring for the rest of the Hunter's game. In any case, with that, thus ends the quest, The Rite of the Wolfgiver, and that officially marks the finish line for the main quest featured in the Bloodmoon expansion in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Throughout this video, I tried my best to share my thoughts, theories, opinions, etc. on the plot, quests, and characters. So now, I wanted to briefly take this time to discuss the highs and lows, and then do a small comparison between Bloodmoon and Tribunal. First, let's talk about the ups. The UESP has each section of the storyline divided into acts. Act 1 includes all of the quests that take place at Fort Frostmoth. I personally really enjoyed all of the missions from Act 1. They served as a great introduction to Solstheim and set the tone very nicely for the upcoming events. Everyone stationed there is miserable and on edge. There's corruption at every turn, and while the player is gone, werewolves attack and take the captain of the fort, your only friend, hostage. In fact, the pacing for the entire questline felt really nice. Another high was hearing the story of Avar Stonesinger. I know it seems like such a minuscule part in this whole expansion, but the lore there was fantastic, and the story was told from a really interesting perspective. In terms of Act 2, which encompasses everything from first meeting the Skull to the siege at Skull Village, I thought the Skull Test of Wisdom was very unique. Investigating a crime amongst the tribe and coming to a conclusion is right up my alley and was a nice break from the action. Teaming up with the Draugr Lord Aslip during the Skull Test of Strength was pretty nifty as well. Act 3 is divided into two separate sections, the werewolf side of the plotline and the Bloodskull side. I preferred the skull side of the story more than the werewolf one, although the cutscenes were a really nice touch. The werewolf gameplay was top-notch. Fighting, maneuvering, interacting with the environment, it was a very refreshing take on Morrowind. I liked how they made it a blessing and a curse. It gave you unnatural combat abilities and movement speed, but you're doomed to transition every night at 9 PM. It's a power that gives and a power that takes. To top it all off, Hircine's ring is a beautiful reward that allows the player to receive all of the benefits from lycanthropy while negating almost all of the negative ones. Now, for Act 4, which is just Hircine's hunt, although it does include the rite of the Wolf Giver, I have mixed feelings about. For now, for the highs, I'll say that I appreciated the closure with Carius and Tharstan. The twist with Tharstan was really unexpected. Even though I did predict it, I just didn't think I was right. I also thought the final boss was done really well, with the player getting to pick which aspect of the hunter they wanted to face, and that results in different rewards for different characters' builds. Now, let's discuss the lows. Beginning with Act 2, I personally thought that the skull test of loyalty was a little too long. The concept was fine and actually quite intriguing, and I know exactly what it was trying to do. Its purpose was to have the player explore the ins and outs and all sections of Solstheim, fighting Spriggans, Reeklings, Bears, Draugr, Grawl, etc. However, I feel as though some of the tests didn't need to be there and just made the quest longer than it needed to be. For example, the Ritual of Trees, or the Rituals of Earth, Sun, and Winds. The last three all played very similar to one another, and at least one could have been knocked out. They could have had just 4 or 5 in place, with each stone representing a cardinal direction on the island, and then maybe one in its center. Moving on, one of my gripes with the werewolf version of Act 3 was that the story wasn't as detailed as the Bloodskull version. So a lot of it just felt like mindless violence. Go here and kill the skull. Go there and kill the skull. Stop this rebellion at Castle Karstaag. Without having gone through the Bloodskull plotline first, I would have never known that the Totem of Claw and Fang was needed for the Restog, and that the Restog was being performed to appease the Allmaker, and that the second phase of the Bloodmoon prophecy was the massacre of the Horkers, etc. Switching over to Act 4, Hircine's Hunt, I have to say I was mostly underwhelmed with what it offered. The inner ring was disappointing and lacked creativity. Bethesda had a chance to make things interesting and to alter the dungeon. Instead, they decided to just make a copy of the outer ring and slightly switch up the maze. I already listed ideas earlier in the video that they could have implemented in order to make the necessary changes. Even though I had difficulty with the dungeon crawl, I realized that even at level 23 or whatever I am, I'm still fairly underleveled for this expansion's endgame, so I won't be making any judgments on that. Finally, the last negative I'll touch upon is the way that they went about Karstaag. He's introduced in the second last quest, but we don't actually get to interact with him until the second last stage of the final mission. Sure, the frost giant looked really cool and was intimidating, but I didn't really feel all that invested in our fight because I didn't have any reason to be. He wasn't fleshed out like Heartfang or Carius. I almost wonder if it was even worth it to include him in this part of the story. I would have preferred if a lowly NPC like Lucius, Arturia, or Angar Icemane was thrown into the hunt and presented as the first prey of the outer ring. Then, Carius gets moved up to the inner ring, and Tharstan is moved to the Huntsman's Hall and buffed up a bit. With this new lineup, I would have been even more invested in the fight, and Tharstan's reveal could have been even more intense. Before moving on to the final topic, I wanted to bring up the overall length of this expansion's main questline. This is technically a segue into the Tribunal comparison, but if you've played through Bloodmoon without trying both sides of Act 3 using the same character, it ends up being only 12 quests long. Furthermore, the first mission is hardly a quest, and a couple of the other ones are incredibly short. I understand that the East Empire Company has a decently sized story to it as well, so the developers had their time split. But in any case, it's a really short story. I wouldn't call this a bad thing nor a good thing, just an observation. Now, Tribunal's questline has 13 mandatory quests and 6 optional ones. Even without the optional ones and all of these small filler ones out of the way, it still ends up being longer than Bloodmoon. It's hard for me though to pick a preferred expansion. Dealing with the temple and wrapping up those storylines felt like a nice segue out of Morrowind and into Mournhold. Almalexia and King Helsith are both really interesting characters, and I found myself more invested with their storylines than I did with the Skull and Fort Frostmoth. Mournhold itself was a beautiful city to explore, and the different districts made it feel so lively. The huge downside though is that other than Clockwork City, the only places you get to adventure off to are the sewers and Dwemer ruins, and those get old very quickly. Bloodmoon, on the other hand, has the player going through tombs, barrows, castles, forts, villages, etc. The added werewolf gameplay mechanics are incredibly unique and add a fresh layer of gameplay. Solstheim contains wilderness, isolation, and the great outdoors, while Mournhold has the complete opposite. Bloodmoon also focuses mostly on Imperials and Nords, a big step away from the Dunmer cast we see in Tribunal in the base game. Overall, I wouldn't say that one is better than the other, as they're two very different experiences. But I would say that for my case, I enjoyed this story more in Tribunal, but had more fun with Bloodmoon. With that being said, that's a wrap on Bloodmoon's main questline. Thank you all for joining me on this journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the story, questline, characters, werewolf gameplay, etc. down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.